Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. Here are some key reminders for extension filers. COVID tax tip 2021-137, September 16, 2021. October 15th is fast approaching. That's the due date for the extension filers to file. That's the last day to file for most people who requested an extension for their 2020 tax return. So remember, 2020, bit of an unusual year in that we had some extensions for some time frames, including the original due date extending from April 15th on outward. However, for most people, unless you're in like an emergency zone or in a military combat zone or something like that, if you filed an extension, we're back to the normal. We're back to the October 15th, back to the standard date, October 15th being the deadline for the extension filers. Now remember, if you have not filed and you're on extension and you're looking to file by October 15th, make sure you're taking advantage of any online software that might be available to you. Remember that the tax code is getting a little bit more complicated in some ways in that, one, most people's tax circumstances are changing a lot from year to year, making it more difficult to do taxes as they are different from year to year. And two, the tax laws have been changing a lot, making a lot more uncertainty that's going into place. And three, the laws that are changing are often impacting low income tax returns as well quite significantly with things like refundable tax credits. We've got the stimulus payments, the prepayments, this kind of thing, although beneficial, are actually somewhat confusing to calculate a lot of times where on returns which would otherwise be quite basic, and therefore you really want to have access to software typically to help you with these types of calculations. And there is access to free software online if your income is below a certain threshold. However, I believe that you might lose access to it if you don't file by the extension deadline, which is October 15th. So make sure that you take advantage of that opportunity if you're looking to do the taxes yourself and you want to get access to the software for free if your income is below a certain threshold. Okay, so these taxpayers can file anytime on or before Friday, October 15th. If they have all of their required tax-related documents, they should also pay part or all of their taxes since amounts owed after May 17th this year could be subject to penalties and interest. Here are tips extension filers should remember. Use IRS Free File. Nearly everyone can e-file their tax return for free through IRS Free File. So the third-party software is really what you want to do. There's also free file fillable forms, but that's kind of like doing the taxes by hand, which again is quite complex when you're in a situation with your returns are changing from year to year, the tax code is changing, and if you have complicated credits that have refundable portions to them, especially the earned income tax credit, then be nice to have software to help guide you through that. So it's really beneficial. So get access to that if you can. The program is available on IRS.gov, the IRS website, through October 15th. E-filing is easy, safe, and the most accurate way for people to file their taxes. So the IRS is trying to get everyone to use the e-filing option these days. Filing electronically can also help taxpayers determine the earned income tax credit, child and dependent care credit, and recovery rebate credit. These are some of the big credits that even if your income is below a certain threshold, even if you're not required to file, may still benefit you, and therefore I would recommend checking it out given the fact that the software is free to look at. So it does take time to kind of figure this stuff out, but it might be worthwhile at least to look into. And again, you want to do that while you have the access to the software, while it's fresh in your mind, and while you have the information. And if you don't have the information, you can generally look up the information at this time, possibly on the IRS website, because remember, most of the information that you get to file your tax return, even if you do not still have it, the IRS has it, because the IRS is the one that mandated your employer, your banks, and so what, to give you the information. They don't really care about you, right? They really want the information given to them, the IRS, the government, so the government can double check that you are filling out your tax returns properly. So if you don't have access to that information, you should be able to go to the IRS website and get possibly W-2s and whatnot from prior years if you need to kind of reconstruct something, although you would rather have it from the source documents if possible. In any case, if someone is eligible for recovery rebate credit and either didn't receive economic impact payments or received less than the full amounts, they must file a 2020 tax return to claim the credit even if they don't usually file. File to get a refund. Anyone due a refund should file as soon as possible and use direct deposit to get their tax refund electronically deposited for free into their financial account. There's no penalty for filing a late return for people who are due a refund. So if you're due a refund, you want to set up the direct deposit so that you can get the refund as soon as possible. If you owe them money, you may not be as concerned to send out a paper return and to send them a paper check. And if they don't have anybody over there to process it because of COVID-19 and whatnot, and it takes them forever to process the thing, no big deal, right? The check will get deposited later as long as you avoid the penalties and interest, as long as you avoid that stick that they wave around, hit people with, right? That's what you're trying to do here. But even if you owe money, it's kind of nice to make the payment directly so that you see that they did process the return, so that you can verify that your payment cleared, so that you can be okay that, you know, things have been done with it. So there's kind of pros and cons to it. But if you're getting paid, getting the money, unless you feel unsecure with the online payments, then it would be good to have the electronic payments so that you get the money faster, and so that if they need to update anything for 2020 to qualify for any of this prepayment stuff that's going out there, like child tax credits and whatnot, that they can process that information as soon as possible. So pay tax balance as soon as possible. The deadline to pay 2020 income tax was May 17th, 2020. So if you owe money, it's already late, right? It should have been paid by May 17th. The extension is only related to the filing requirements generally. So taxpayers can check their account. There's a link to that balance, or view payment options online. There's a link to that as well. They can pay taxes online for free from a checking or saving account with Pay. Those who owe taxes and can't pay their balance in full should pay as soon as they can to reduce interest and penalties for the late payment. This IRS has options for people who can't pay their taxes, including applying for a payment plan on IRS.gov. Now, if you cannot pay your taxes, you're saying, hey, I haven't filed my taxes, I went on extension because I know I owe them money and I can't pay them. And so it's kind of discouraging to do my taxes at that point in time. Everyone else bragging about getting a refund or something like that. I know I'm going to be owing them money. What you do not want to do is just not file, because the whole government system is set up to try to get people into compliance, right? So if you don't file, then they hit you with the stick of penalties and interest, and they'll hit you with the stick later, right? Because the penalties and interest will compile up, and you'll have less leverage on which to negotiate with them at that point in time, because they're going to say, hey, look, you haven't talked to us for this amount of time, and now we're going to pile up the penalties and interest and so on and so forth. So what you want to do is act sooner and say, hey, look, I can't pay you at this point in time. I'll set up a payment plan, and the payment plan will still result in paying possibly some penalties and interest, but it'll keep you in compliance with the IRS, and it should lower the penalties and interest that would be in place. So you still want to file, you still want to be in alignment talking to the IRS, and then just set up the payment plan. You should be able to set up the payment plan basically online. You don't really have to, talk to anyone about it, really. You can generally set it up online and then get that all working and going forward. So file by the deadline to avoid penalties. Taxpayers should file by Friday, October 15th, 2021 to avoid a failure to pay penalty. What taxpayers should do about missing deadline. Anyone who did not request an extension by this year's May 17th deadline should file and pay as soon as possible. This will stop additional interest and penalties from adding up. So obviously, again, you don't want to say, I missed the deadline, now it's all over, now I'm just going to not do anything going forward, because the longer you're in discompliance, the whole system, of course, is to set up to get people generally back into compliance. And so the longer that you're not, lining yourself back up to what they want you to do, then the more they hit you with the stick, penalties and interest. So you want to basically, set up the payment plan generally and get back into filing requirements and get everything set up so that, you're got your silent partners happy over there, and you can move on with your business and your life and whatnot. So different deadlines for some member of the military. Special deadline extensions may apply for certain military service members and eligible support personnel in combat zones. Mil Tax online software is available to serve members of their families regardless of income, and is offered through the Department of Defense. So if you're in the military and you're in a combat zone, then thank you for your service, and the IRS might be gracious enough to give you an extension in that case. There's also that mill tax online software, which I always have questions about. I've never actually used it myself, but it's free, and it's free even, I believe, if your income is above the threshold where the other softwares are limited. In other words, especially this year, I believe the IRS has kind of pressured the third-party softwares like TurboTax and whatnot to offer a free options for incomes but below a certain threshold due to all the changes in the laws and the changes in people's tax circumstances and them wanting to give out, these credits and so on. And the mill tax is there for members of the military. So I always kind of have a question: if your income was below the certain threshold of $75,000, something like a TurboTax or something like that, if it were free, would that be better or worse than the mill tax? Because I would assume TurboTax, even for people of the military, although it's not specially designed for people in the military, still has the capacity to do the functionality, and it might have an interview process that if you tell them that you are a member of the military, it can give you a pretty good interview process and pick up the resources and what needs to be happening for members of the military, versus the mill tax software, which obviously would be designed to interview people and go through, I would think, a similar interview process for people that are specifically in the military, but it's made by the Department of Defense, which is, by the government, basically. It's not competing with other software. So I would question as to whether or not, it's the best software out there, given the fact that it's not really in competition with proprietary software. So I'm kind of curious as to whether, in other words, the mill tax software would be better for people in the military if they can get it free, or something like a TurboTax free. Which one would make the tax return easier for people in the military? If anybody has any information on that, I'd be interested to hear about it. But in any case, you got those two options. Remember, if your income is below a certain threshold, and even if your income's a little bit above a certain threshold, if you're in the military, you might get access to the free proprietary software. Just go into the free software, and you might get access to that for free. That might end by October 15th, though. And then the mill tax software, I believe, is going to be generally free, just in general. So then the question, if you have access to both, would be, which one would be easier and better to use.